Hello, everybody. I'll give it a second for people to start signing on. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Take it away to myself. Welcome everyone to our webinar, Lowe's Knows Third-Party Risk, with our special guest, Jefferson Pike, Senior Manager of IT Security for TPRM. And also joined with us today is our very own Vice President of Third-Party Risk, Brenda Ferraro. My name is Amanda Farina, wannabe TV show host and hopeful Bachelor contestant if I'm still of age. But for now, I'm also just your business development rep here. I have a couple of things to get started with before we start the show. Everyone is muted. That means everybody, we know you're all home. We don't want to hear vacuums. We don't want to hear coffee makers or Amazon Prime coming to your door. So we're going to just cut to the chase. No one can talk. But even though you can't talk, we really want this to be interactive. So please we'll answer. Ask any questions that you may have in the console in Zoom. Do the Q&A, not the chat. That makes it easier for everybody. And hopefully when time permits, at the end, we'll answer all of those. Today's webinar is being recorded, so we will send it to you tomorrow morning and you can share to whomever you wish. And that's about it from me. I'm going to take it over to Brenda. Thank you so much for both of you for joining, and let's get started.
Thanks, Amanda. I always like it when you start these because they are so exciting and fun, and I will totally promote you for the Bachelorette.
Thanks everyone for all of your support.
So I'm happy to be here with Jefferson today. And by the way, all of our announcements have come out with him as the senior manager. He has recently been promoted to Director of Information Security. So congratulations on that, Jefferson. And also,
thanks.
I think that this is our 1-year anniversary of when we met and started talking about the third-party risk program for Lowe's. I was in North Carolina around this time, and I think it was also maybe your first week.
I think it's my first day or second day on the job, yeah.
That's been like firestorm of here's Brenda talking about third party and all the strategy she thinks that you should do. But congratulations on how far Lowe's has come in 1 year. It's been expedient, more so than any other company that I've ever been working with before on strategies. So kudos to you and your team.
Wow,
congratulations at your promotion and on your promotion. And the one thing that I'd like for you to talk about, everybody pretty much knows about me. I've come from the finance background at Charles Schwab and eBay and PayPal, and then I went to healthcare, and I've worked in retail before, and now I'm at Prevalent, being able to help other companies grow their programs. But tell us a little bit about you, and then maybe a fun fact about what's your favorite thing to do during 2020?
Sure. Thanks. And first of all, thanks for having me here. I love being here representing the team who actually did all the work for us to be here. But my name is Jefferson Pike. I'm a former Navy, first of all, probably what I'm proudest of, former military. Spent time in the telecom sector, financial sector, and eventually came to Lowe's. And actually, cybersecurity is my passion, but I actually did that late in life. I was actually more on the technical side in other areas and in business analysis for years, and even internal audit at a big bank over their third-party program. So it's not your typical approach, but what we find is a lot of people in this industry don't have a typical background and come from a varied mix of backgrounds, which actually helps us in our particular case with third party. So, and we'll learn more about that. Since been down with this whole period of being stuck in the house pretty much, when trying not to gain weight, this is a great time to learn and read and actually go after certifications and training, because most classes now are on demand, online, and you can even take your certification exam at home. So I've been taking advantage of that. It's trying to learn as much as I can just in every area. So it's pretty boring, but it keeps you out of trouble.
Well, it's way more collegiate than me. I've been just trying to get away in 2020 to places like Sedona, Arizona, walking around the creek, looking at birds. Many people know I'm a birder, so I like to go out and identify birds. So that's part of the craziness about me. But we will now go away from what have we been doing in 2020 for ourselves. I like the way that you've been learning, and help others learn about what Lowe's has been doing with their program. Our agenda today is, we tried to be very creative, and Lowe's is a home improvement store with many other items that they provide for their customers. But we took this webinar and we started thinking about, well, how can we make it relatable from a third-party risk management building process to building a home? So there's blueprinting, which is really about assessing what you need to build. There's building the team, how to integrate all the different departments within your organization, so it's an enterprise approach. There's scoping the job. That's more about understanding the universe of vendors or suppliers that you need to assess. Gearing up, that's more about what are the core competencies that you need to implement and execute for your program. And then, of course, execution, getting that part of the program up and running. And then measuring progress, showing how well you've done and what risks you've identified for the company. So anything you want to add to that agenda? It looks pretty meaty for us to go over, Jefferson. Is that enough?
That's plenty enough. Let's
That's
go ahead
enough.
and get to that.
Yeah. So let's start real quick with, I have watched your program grow, and there's many different things that you need to look at when you're architecting or building your program. And from my experience, it takes discovery, it takes planning, it takes knowing multiple fundamentals that have to be incorporated into that design that you're going to use for building the program. So what did you do to assess the needs to architect your program and build it?
Sure, great question. And first of all, so it's called third-party risk management for a reason. It's not third-party compliance management. And I think a lot of people, including me in the past, have had the mindset that you need to come in and do everything. And you honestly just can't do that. You have to figure out where to start and not beat yourself up thinking you're not accomplishing everything on day one. It does take time. And risk management is not new. In fact, when you study information warfare on the military side, you learn that the guy who wrote The Art of War talked about risk management 7,000 years ago, Sun Tzu, and he said that if you know yourself and you know your enemy, you don't need to worry about the outcome of 100 battles. And essentially he's saying, if you assess yourself and you assess the threats to yourself, you don't need to worry about the outcome. You'll make it. And with third parties, we have to own them as part of us and actually assess them and assess the threats to them. So we started with that, and we had to look at our industry because the retail industry is totally different from financial or healthcare. And in the financial sector, you have regulatory agencies telling you what to do for third party. And the OCC will tell you have to have a continuous monitoring program in place, which is great. But in retail, you don't have those regulatory factors like you do. And there's heavy fines. There are other things you can take into account. There's guidance, but you don't really have any kind of real regulation across the industry. So you have to figure out what your own risk appetite is if you're taking that risk management approach. So first it came from leadership, and our leadership, a lot of them came from places like Target, Home Depot, and other places that have experienced bad situations, and they don't want that to happen again. So it's something we're very mindful of. Like, how do we best protect ourselves in a retail environment, which is totally different from healthcare? So had to look at that, and then you have to figure out, if you're out in the middle of the woods and you're trying to get out of the woods, a map won't help you by itself, and the compass won't help you by itself. You have to have the two together and use that compass. You identify a couple points, see where you are on the map, then you work your way out. And it's the same thing with this. So we had to look for a reference frame we could use and a framework that we could figure out, what the lay of the land would be. But then we had to figure out where we were on that map. And so we conducted a couple self-assessments. We found a framework, one from Shared Assessments, called the Vendor Risk Management Maturity Model. And we conducted a self-assessment on ourselves and figured out where we score on this. Is very similar to doing a gap analysis for NIST or something else, but much wider than NIST. And we're also looking at things originally from an information security perspective. And every company does it differently. But for us, third party is embedded within information security. So when you're looking at an asset can be anything of value to a company. Typically, you're looking at just the confidentiality at first. For example, when you hear about most data breaches, it's because what's making the news is how the confidentiality was breached. And there are actually two other factors to it. There's integrity, making sure that data stays accurate, and availability, which now is a big thing, especially with supply chain. So you can't do all three at once. You start with what you know. And in our case, we knew information security, so we started there, and we plotted ourselves on the self-assessment framework and figured out where our gaps were. And just like any organization, we had some good gaps, but then we would take that and actually plot that on a roadmap. Now that we know where we are, how do we get out of there? And so we would take every domain from the shared assessments framework, from that room assessment, and create really lanes on this roadmap. And so program governance is a great example. We figured out, okay, for that category, here's some issues where we're falling short, so let's put them on the roadmap. And every subcategory from the framework, we just plugged into the roadmap and started following that. And if you follow the Agile framework, then you'd understand this terminology where we're taking all the big categories on the framework. We made those our epics, and then the subcategories, those big projects, those were our tasks for each epic. I'm sorry, our features, and then it breaks down into stories and tasks. So we're using that as a framework really just to get us out of the woods and to move forward. And rather than just assess ourselves once a year, we actually assess ourselves maybe every 6 months or so to get ready for our big annual assessment, because we don't want any surprises at the annual assessment. So theoretically, just like when you do a performance management eval, when you get to the annual assessment, you should not be surprised at what you see as the gaps. So we like to know the gaps ahead of time. And it's just a continuous process of doing that.
Yeah, and I like how this isn't the only slide that shows what those features or components are, or epics. You've got 8 of them. And many companies that are building their program aren't looking at all 8. They're just looking at, what is my life cycle of an assessment? How far is it going to go through? And where am I going to get stuck? So did you want to talk a little bit about this roadmap, or did you want to move to the next slide to show all of the 8 components, or are there specifics to these too?
Sure, we can go on to the next one. This just shows example. If you look at that VRMMM self-assessment framework, then these line up perfectly, and you'll see where we got these from. We added one other category, though. If you do go to the next slide, I'm not sure it's on here or not, and we have a separate category for additional information security group work streams. And a big part of this is trying to figure out, how do we best partner with all the other teams, and how do we take work on board to support other teams, but also provide value for what we're doing. So we created a separate team for that, or a separate lane for that. And a couple other things we did in the beginning was, we knew that you can't be a lone wolf doing this. No one person has all the answers. And so we actually you actually set us up with a peer group with leaders from other companies who were maybe ahead of the curve, or they've been doing this longer than us, and they're experts in their field, and they shared information with us, because a lone wolf will not survive in this, and other people have been here and done this, and so it's great to learn from their experiences. And just like you have in special forces, you have a team. The Rambo model, one guy going out there and doing everything, doesn't really work. You have a team of professionals that all have skills, and so this peer group is a mixed group of different people, different industries, but they're all focused on third-party risk, and it's a great opportunity to actually hear from the experts and learn what they're doing. And I mentioned that I like to read. Well, if you go on Amazon and look for a book on third-party risk, you'll find almost nothing at all.
Really 3?
Yes, there are very few books, and they're not even that great, but for the most part. But there's not a lot out there, so maybe somebody will write the definitive third-party risk management book for us. But there is no great book to go to, except for one, and this is one thing I would advise everybody. If you've not seen this book, there is a two-book set called the Ciso Desk Reference Guide, and it's by Bonnie, Hayslip, and Stamper. And these 3 gentlemen were all accomplished CISOs at their companies. They know everything about information security, but there's a chapter in there just about third-party risk. And it's the best resource I found anywhere that's actually on paper on how to do third-party risk management. So that's where the nerd comes out and says, well, if you want a book, that's the book to go to. But about the only one I could find anywhere before even starting this.
Well, I am a geek nerd when it comes to third party as well. So I'm going to be picking that up and reading that chapter, or having you copy it and send it over to me if it's just that chapter. So let's work into talking about how you aligned other departments, because everybody's doing assessments their own way. Procurement might be doing attestations or looking at things such as credit checks or Dun& Bradstreet. Legal has their own lens that they need to look at assessments. There's vendor security, IT security, OT security, and then a lot of leadership teams that may be a little bit fearful of how you progress in your program. It might be at a speed they're not comfortable with. So how did you take and look at how to change culture in a normal way that's appetizing for Lowe's?
It sounds silly, but it's all about diplomacy and being the ambassador to other business units and being there for them, because a lot of times the big company, you have a problem with silos. Different teams don't talk with each other. Everybody does their own thing and it's not even aware of what else is going on. So we position ourselves kind of be the ambassadors between all these different teams. So we're the ones talking with the third parties. We're also speaking with legal on issues and offering to review contracts for them if they come up. We're working with the business units and explaining to them the risk associated with the vendors they're working with. And we're also working with sourcing and letting them know, here's what we're seeing and here's what we recommend, because usually these teams don't talk all that well to each other. And if you try to explain information security risk or a lot of these third-party risks to a business unit or to a vendor, they have no idea what you're talking about. So you actually have to be not just an ambassador, but a translator as well, and be able to explain in very easy terms to non-technical people, explain the risk and explain it in business terms. And so it's a unique skill set. And so just having, cyber savvy people on a team won't necessarily help you when you're trying to translate. So, and we found, and I know we'll talk about this in a little bit, but as we built our team, it wasn't really the skill set necessarily that was what brought them to the team, because we didn't want people always being the same. And because we have that varied skill set, we have different people that can take different tasks and follow the passions differently. So essentially, we had to be the ambassadors. And at Lowe's, there's a mentality that you want to take the customer to the aisle. And hopefully you've seen that in stores, where if you walk into a store and you don't know where something is, if you ask somebody, they shouldn't say, an employee there should not tell you, oh, it's down in aisle 12. They should walk with you to the aisle, take you to that area and show you that part. Make sure it's what you need for what you're doing. Maybe even ask you some more questions and help you. We want to do the same thing for the business units. So we want to make sure that we're taking them to the aisle. If they've never seen an assessment before, or they don't understand why we're doing this, we want to work with them through the process and actually get that assessment done, get the business unit happy, get the vendor happy, and play that that ambassador role. And the other trick we found, not trick, but one thing we really try to focus on is there's something called the Sundown Rule, which is in every company everywhere probably, but a lot of teams just get slack and don't follow it. And that is, if you get an email request, you respond to it by the end of the day. And that sounds so silly, but we found as we made that a priority for us, and other business units or divisions within the company would send us a question, we'd respond the same day. And because usually they have a project going live next week, or vendor has to be onboarded, contract's getting ready to sign. This is the first time they heard about us, and now they're stressed out. And we always try to respond the same day. And just that decent amount of respect going to a non-third-party business unit would have them come back to us later on and saying, hey, you were really helpful before. What do you think about this? And over time, those relationships develop. But it's not something that happens overnight. It was just trying to make ourselves relevant and be that translator for everybody.
Yeah, you're actually enabling the business and enabling the company to identify and reduce risk. And so I like the way that you're taking the approach to help them and be that ambassador or translator. I remember when I was making a decision of going from a big company to a vendor type company that has so many clients, which makes it big in its right. And I was told by a very wise individual that, Brenda, you are going to be the translator between the customer and the product and the company. So you have to be able to speak different languages. So I really like how you put that. Now, the first thing that's important about a third-party risk program, and even getting started, is to be able to know what your vendor or your supplier universe is. So did you experience a challenge with identifying and understanding that holistic list?
Yes, and thankfully we asked other companies in that peer group and other auditors and everybody we could ask who are the experts, and mention our issue to them, and they said, great, it sounds like you were like every other company in the world, which is good and bad in a way. But essentially, it's always a challenge. It seems like, after talking with other companies as well, to have that definitive list. And it kind of goes back to that whole risk versus compliance issue. You're never going to find that totally complete, exhaustive, accurate list of vendors, but you also can't wait for 3 years to get that actual that list put together. So yes, you may have some vendors listed in the procurement database. You may have some in the accounts payable database where you actually see who's getting paid. You may have it in a governance, risk, and compliance database somewhere. But to get information from all these different databases and figure out who's actually right is a huge challenge. And,
Right.
and there's no silver bullet for it either. It's just, it takes a lot of detective work. And the guys on the team would tell you that, a lot of their efforts are spent just trying to find owners or find out who vendors are. And sometimes you're playing detective, just like trying to hunt down leads.
Yeah, I like one of the approaches that your organization is using where, because of resiliency and what we're going through in 2020, you've actually looked at, well, if we have a point of contact internally, we're going to go internally and ask them for stratification or profiling information about the vendor, and in order to make sure that we're providing the right type of assessments. But you've also decided innovatively to go directly to the vendor to say, here's a very short questionnaire that's going to give us the attributes that we need to know in order to make sure that we are assessing you appropriately, and then using that to shore up with what the records are internally. It's okay to do that, even though the vendors may come back to you and say, well, why don't you know what we're doing with you? Well, it's, everybody needs to shore up and make sure that we know each other, what each other is doing, because things can change over time. You might have a vendor that's doing one thing one year or for a couple months, and then all of a sudden someone says, hey, we already have this vendor vetted, let's use them also for X, Y, and Z. So it's a good thing that you're doing in that perspective. So what is this Goalkeeper for third parties?
That was an analogy we used for our team internally. A lot of days it seems like, and every industry has their own metrics. Like we know that there are thousands of vendors, and for the retail sector, an average breach costs about $1.8 million. And we know what the record dollar amount is, or the dollar amount per record for a breach. And you can use all this, the FUD factor, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which you don't ever want to do. You want to have facts, and actually when you're explaining to leadership what the risks are. But knowing that you have a large number of these vendors out there, that any one of them could become like an explosive soccer ball, where you have, we're trying to make sure that does not become a breach for the company. So every third party we're looking at, it's like we're the last line of defense, trying to make sure that they don't score on the company. We want the business to succeed, but if the business is making profit, but then having to pay it out the back due to fines and all the financial risks associated with the breach, then the company's not making the profit it should be. So we're trying to safeguard that. And so it kind of feel like the lonely goalkeeper at the back, but rather than have just one soccer ball coming at you, imagine thousands that you're trying to stop, because from the third party perspective, you're trying to make sure that all of these thousands that are in your inventory, none of them become the next big explosive soccer ball. So it's
I liked one of the presentations that you had before, and all of a sudden it was like thousands and thousands of soccer balls. Mm-hmm. I would not want all of those coming at me if I was a goalkeeper, for sure. So what's the strategy that you're putting together to make sure you're at a competitive advantage?
Sure. So some businesses, you can have the us versus them approach, where you have the almost like an American football team. You have the offensive team; they're the ones out scoring, they're bringing the dollars in, and it's all about the offense. Or you may have the defensive squad out in the field, and they're the ones just trying to do their job. But you almost have two different teams, both playing for the same side, but on the field at different times and never actually working as one. And this approach is more of the actual football, soccer. The approach is you have the business units and all the other teams on the field at the same time. We're all working together. The business units are, yes, they're trying to increase revenue and generate it, and we're trying to help them do that and do it in a way that they succeed, but they succeed securely, so that the revenue that comes in stays with the company, and no bad reputational risk is ever encountered, and no bad apples really come in, and we're keeping the company safe, but working with all these different teams and all on the same page, and kind of taking away that diverse approach of thinking that it's we're business units, or we're playing defense, so we don't talk to you. That's not the case at all.
And I like how you have different filter levels. It means that everybody is working together as a team, and somewhere it's going to get caught into that gatekeeper perspective versus just go directly to the goal and get through where it shouldn't. So there are so many different products and ways to manage your third-party risk. And I remember when I was at a company and I owned third-party risk management, I had 3 different Intel companies and 3 different standard questionnaires, and none of them were integrated. Now that was about 5 or 6 years ago, of course, but what process did you use to select the right tools, and how did you weigh the process or the options?
So, and it wasn't just tools for us, it also was the processes and the people. How do we choose? Do we outsource all the work? Do we just have one person at Lowe's doing third party, or how do we want to do it? And that was really based on risk appetite and direction from leadership, where they wanted this to be an in-house program. So, there are other solutions. Our solution was to create our own team. And so the team that we brought in, like I said before, all had extremely different skill sets. Well, one guy is an expert at networking, and another one is an expert at actual relations with the vendor, or maybe knows the company inside and out, our company inside and out. But one thing they all have in common is passion. So when we were hiring people on board, we weren't necessarily looking at making sure they had certain certifications in place, because if they have the passion and want to learn, we can teach them. And then they actually learn from each other. And then we had a core team of lead analysts who would train all the other analysts and share their perspectives. And over time, everyone got to learn from everybody and learn these different perspectives. And that was huge. So we have this, this core team that's extremely talented now and extremely passionate about what they do. So we had that in place. And as far as the tools go, we really want everyone to become risk managers, essentially, not become just risk analysts. But you can't have thousands of analysts doing third-party risk, because no company could ever afford that. So there has to be a trade-off between, how many assessments can one person do and do them effectively and efficiently. And so we looked at multiple options, not only for how to handle assessments, but how to actually look at what we call threat intel, how to do a security ratings platform. And we looked at multiple solutions for that. We knew that we couldn't just send spreadsheets out to everybody, which is like the old school way of doing it, sending out a Word document or a spreadsheet. So that didn't work for us. Now, full disclosure, what worked for us best was the Prevalent solution, and just the fact that here we have a portal where we can automate loading up these vendors into a portal, inviting them to come into it and fill out the information, answer the questions, and then automatically have risk findings generated that we can then validate, see if they're accurate or not. We can work with the vendor to actually remediate those findings, and all that was in one solution. So that for us, that has worked out to be the best way to go. So all of our analysts, we feel, can do probably a larger, well, we know a much larger bucket of assessments per year doing it this way than they could with going through spreadsheets and just trying to figure out how to translate these spreadsheets or Word docs.
Yeah, I like the way that your program has embedded pre-configured risk remediations, and you're using those to guide the vendors on what you're looking for. You also have pre-configured tiers that you're going to talk about, and you've identified risk multipliers towards those tiers, so that if you're looking for a higher risk third party, then those risks would reflect appropriately. And having that portal where you're just keeping track of everything in one place, it's very easy for the vendors. So it's like a one-stop shop, not only for you, but for the vendors, and in the future, maybe the business units as well.
Absolutely.
So if we look at everything that you had to put together, which was a lot, how did you address the fundamentals to execute? So looking back a year ago and looking at the spreadsheets and having to decide on what questionnaire you were going to use as a standard and so on, what did that look like? And you let me know, these are your slides that are coming up. Some of them have animations, so tell me when to push the button so that I do it at the right time.
Okay. Oh, well, again, it all goes back to the fact that we know we can't do everything at once. We can only do what we can currently do, and then have a plan for adding capabilities in the future. So that's how we started. And you can go to the next slide here. So the conventional approach is, probably everyone here knows is that when you bring any third party on board, there should be a series of assessments that are done. A lot of times you may find that only one assessment has been done, if any, and that's just to bring them on board in the very beginning. And after that, they're kind of forgotten about. We've seen that happen before. Or many times you may find that vendors would just be brought on board with no assessment ever. And when you actually go to ask about an assessment, you'll kind of get a blank stare. That's not at Lowe's, that's at any company. So the conventional approach ideally would be to possibly do an assessment up front, a very quick assessment if you had multiple vendors being looked at for an RFP process. As they're coming on board, do an onboarding assessment and make sure that they have critical controls in place, make sure there are no other big issues that you found. If you find anything, you can possibly remediate it or let them know about it, let the business unit know about it. Ideally, maybe reassess them later on, and then you could have virtual or on-site assessments. And then if you ever do finish that relationship with them, ideally it terminates at some point. All good things must come to an end. So theoretically, that vendor goes off the menu one day. Then you do an offboarding assessment and make sure they've actually destroyed all the data that you consider to be your vital data with them. That's a conventional approach. But again, if you did that for every vendor and did that, the staff would take for that would be insane and just not affordable. So we're taking more of a risk-based approach, and that would be the next click there. We can still do the RFP assessment. That actually takes about, and we give SLAs too, service level agreements or service level targets to the business units, and we try to stick by that for new assessments. So the business unit knows that if they come to us with 2 or 3 companies and they're wondering which one to use, we'll do a quick mini assessment within several days, and they know what that is. Our onboarding assessments are a little bit longer, but we tell them that up front, tell them what to expect, we're very clear with the expectations. But then we go into a continuous evaluation approach where we're not doing the annual and biannual reassessment necessarily, but we are looking at things consistently and all the time. Like we'll use our security ratings platform to look and monitor for alerts coming in. If we see something drop on the alert, now this could be security scorecard, BitSite, Risk Recon, there are a bunch out there. But as you get alerts, then you take action and actually trigger a reassessment if necessary. If they have findings from the risk assessment initially, then you work with them to actually remediate those findings and track them over time, which thankfully for us, the Prevalent platform does that. We can work with the business owner, and then we also look at incident response capabilities. So if we learn of security incidents with vendors, then that will trigger an assessment as well. Theoretically, if they're low risk, if we're watching them the whole time and they're that risk rating, that security credit score is good, and there are no issues, then we'll continue to monitor them, but not necessarily go in and do a reassessment every year, every 2 years. We'll reassess as required, and we'll make sure every year that the business owner is still having a relationship with that vendor. And now we can do on-site assessments, and the team is trained to do that, but with COVID, you cannot do that. So there's a big push to do virtual, which I know Shared Assessments teaches about, but we can also do on-sites if necessary, and depending on the situation and the vendor, we do that, and then do that offboarding assessment as required. So taking this risk-based approach allows you to do really, you can do more assessments and be more effective with fewer people. So that's the long-term solution here.
Yeah, and I like that you're doing continuous evaluation. A lot of companies are doing the one and done or the annual or biannual. And when risks are mitigated, that's when you're supposed to verify or validate. So good job on that. This is one of my favorite 2 slides that you're getting into. So I can't wait to hear about it.
This one, it always takes some discussion. So the way I best explain this is, security many times is thought of being a roadblock. And I've seen it at companies before where the business unit really doesn't want to go to security or go through a third-party risk process because they're in a hurry. They don't want to be slowed down. And it's a lot like when you go to the airport, you get there, you have to stand in line at TSA forever, go through the process, get through, and then get to your gate. Now, it's not TSA's fault if you show up late to the airport. They say you should be there 2 hours early, but no one ever shows up 2 hours early. We're always running at the last minute. And then you get frustrated at TSA because they're holding you up. And so the typical model for onboarding assessments as well is, hold up, let's look at the third party, let's look at the assessment, Let's make sure we're doing everything properly. Wait until we give you the go ahead, and then you may proceed and go onto your gate and take off and then and launch your engagement and enjoy the friendly skies. That doesn't work in a retail environment. We have that risk appetite for us is really about making sure that the business gets done what they need to do, and we do not hold them back, which puts us in a very fine line being security, because you want to make sure that the business is moving forward and developing everything it needs to succeed, but do it securely. So our approach is a little bit different, and you can go to the next slide here. So when a new engagement comes in, we learn of a new vendor, we ask the business owner to create initial intake requests, and that's what we'll do, that initial due diligence and assess them and see what is the real risk there. What data are they working with? This is where we tier them, and you hear about tiering all the time. We'll look at the true inherent risk at the very beginning. And so imagine you're walking through the airport, but now you don't have to stop at TSA anymore. Now, as soon as you walk in, you get your boarding pass, and as you go through the airport, you stop at Starbucks, get your coffee, get to the gate, you're ready there to take off. And there's maybe somebody from TSA saying, "Thank you for your time. You're good to go. Here's your, we'll stamp your boarding pass. Have a great day." And that's what we're doing in the background while that engagement is moving forward. We're doing the things. We're looking at the assessment. We're looking at any threat intel we have on them. We'll ask questions. We'll follow up with the questions. At the end of the day, we give a recommendation to the business owner. They either can recommend, or we recommend the engagement, recommend they can proceed. We will recommend that they can proceed, but there's some things that need to be remediated, and we need to remediate that within a certain time frame. Or we'll say we do not recommend, and we'll say there are some serious issues here. We really don't recommend you continue. At the end of the day, though, it's the business that owns it, and we use that 3 lines of defense risk management model that that's so commonplace. It's now called the 3 lines of defense, or 3 lines model, because defense isn't really an issue anymore, because they want business to be proactive. But the 3 lines model says that the business units are the first line of defense. They're the ones really responsible for risk. But the second line are all your risk and compliance teams, legal, security, and everybody else. And then your third line is internal audit. They make sure that from a high angle, a high perspective, that everybody's doing what they say they'll do. So using that approach, we're telling the business unit, okay, here's the engagement, here's what we discovered, and here's what we recommend, but it's your choice. If they continue with that engagement, then they actually, their VP has to sign and accept the risk, and then and we track that. But we are not the Department of No. And at the bank, you can be the Department of No to some extent, and in healthcare you can, but in retail you have to really be doing risk assessments quickly and efficiently, and act as that advisor. So we advise the business units, and so we're not acting as the big bad police officer. We're giving them the full information, and then it's their choice.
Yeah. So I like how you've put together your pyramid of tiers and how many days, and you did discuss recommended with remediation, or not recommended. What more can you talk about with the tiering and how that's worked for you?
Sure. So the tiering is essentially based on the data classification for our company. Every company has their own way of looking at data. Some data may be considered public or not really a big deal. Other data may be more proprietary, or it could be personal information. So based on the data that we learn about during the intake process, we'll tier it. And that simply means that the higher risk vendor gets more scrutiny and additional due diligence. And either way, all of these get assessed, even if it's just a company that has public data and no real risk. They've still been assessed by doing that intake form. So we have the record of that. We have their engagement number. We have their their URL, their domain that we can put into our monitoring tool and monitor them for security incidents in the future. So we ask everyone come through the funnel just so we can at least log them and then determine if we need to do anything else. And then once they come through the system, they get that external review where we're looking from the outside in using the platform. Then we use an automated questionnaire through Prevalent and get that inside out view. And then we'll follow up if necessary. And then at the end of the day, we get that final assessment status and that recommendation.
Excellent. All right, so we're going into the next question, and I would assume That you would want to make sure you have key performance indicators and risk indicators that you're telling your management about. Like, one of the things we did at the very beginning was we not only did you use the vroom from shared assessments, but you also used a maturity assessment from Prevalent. So what are the things that you did, and what are the KPIs and KRIs that were important as you progressed through your program?
Sure. So the self-assessments are a big part of that. And we, in turn, use those for the overall enterprise assessments as well. Those feed as inputs for the enterprise assessment. And it's also important to know the difference between KPIs and KRIs and who your audience is. For example, you don't want to be telling your CEO all the little details about which analyst has how many assessments at any given time or how many they've completed this week. They don't care. They want to know at the end of the day, what's the risk to the company and where do we stand and what's the biggest issue. So there are multiple levels of these KPIs and KRIs that we use. KPIs can be something as simple as, the number of assessments that we're doing this year compared to last year, and then how do they result? What's the final status of the assessments that we're doing? How many are coming in from different intake points? How many are RFP assessments versus how many are onboarding? Are we not getting many onboarding assessments? Well, why not? Let's focus on how to increase that workflow. Then we can also break it down. Thanks to the Prevalent platform, we can see all the different phases of the assessment, and we have service level objectives for each one of the phases. Like, we know how long it should take for us from the time it comes in from intake to getting launched to the vendor. How many days does it take, or hours, to actually get that assessment out? How long should they be taking to fill out the questionnaire and give us all the information back? And then so we'll look at that. How long should it be taking us once we have the information to make that final recommendation? So we track all that for performance and improvement. So we know what the durations per phases are. But for KRIs, that's really where you're telling management, the so what? What does all this mean? And that's where it gets really interesting, because the data we can pull from the platform allows us to see things like, what are our top 10 risks right now? What risk are we seeing across the enterprise with our vendors? What are the most common things? We can also blend that in with our security monitoring platform and see what are the biggest vulnerabilities we're seeing out there right now with our third parties, and what should we be working with them and addressing with them. We can look at breaking it down by business unit, breaking it down by tier. We can figure out, okay, well, which business unit is the riskiest business unit? How many business units, who has the most engagements that have been recommended against by us, and they're proceeding, and figure out how we need to work with that. So really, like, breaking it down to the business unit level, that's really where we're headed, and we can actually show the third parties per business unit and show that risk level based on accumulation of the findings we had from all the risk assessments.
That's great to know. And I know that you've worked really hard on KPIs and KRIs for your management, and that's why you've been seen as a program and a team of resources along with yourself that have gotten so far so fast. I remember when we were talking about, okay, well, let's just do a couple of launches at a time. And now we're like ramping up 250 a week just for the stratification questionnaires, so that we can get the information back to know what type of assessment needs to then get sent to them. So you've grown from, I only maybe have 1,000 of vendors that I need to assess, to I really need to research my entire universe. And that could be up into and I'm just making this number up, I'm not saying it's Lowe's at all, but it could be up into the 14,000 range. So we're trying to figure out very rapidly, with threat intelligence and with stratification and essentials or profiling questionnaires, what do I need to work on first? So it's a really interesting thing watching you go through.
And there can be a lot of numbers out there, and there's a difference between data and information. Like, we can pull a lot of data from everywhere, but unless there's actually value to that data, then it becomes information if there's value to it, and being able to have it be actionable. So trying to take all this data, which we can pull from multiple platforms, boiling that down, and then delivering it to leadership, and giving them that so what with real information is critical.
Yeah, when you architected the program, you thought about categories, you thought about tags, you thought about tasks that would have to happen, you thought about every little step that may have to be taken. And then when you came up to a scenario that you didn't think about, you very quickly pivoted to figure out, okay, we're sending out a ton of essentials or profiling or stratification questionnaires, which you call the vendor information gathering questionnaire. And as that comes back, there's some that aren't responding. What do we do with those? There's some who came back within minutes. Now they're ready for an assessment. What do we do about that? So it's been very fun to watch you go through it. But with all that being said, what are maybe the 3 key takeaways? And you can say more than you want to, if just more than 3, but what are the key takeaways that you would tell everyone on this call listening in that you would want them to learn from your experiences versus having to experience it themselves?
Number one, don't try to be a lone wolf. And I figured out the hard way. There are other people, other teams, even with your own company, who have the answers. You just have to find out who they are, and you won't know until you ask. Looking back, I think I could have asked other teams better questions in the beginning and found out answers that we found out eventually 3 or 4 months later that really there should have been more collaboration in the first place. And we're very good about collaborating, but that could have been done quicker. Going back to the whole lone wolf versus the special forces team model, it really does take a team to do this. No one has all the answers, and so that was big. Asking for help. Now in our case, we use your advisory services, the strategic services, which really helped us a lot because, first of all, we found out that, well, we're not so different from everybody else. We're not so behind the curve as everybody else. So that's good. We actually, we have our own issues and it's normal. So finding out that we're normal, first of all, was great because if you're in a silo, you think that everybody else is so far ahead of you with their development and maturity that, we really need to catch up. Well, it turns out that was just an illusion. But until you actually hear from people in other peer groups and talk and try to find out, a perspective outside of yourself, you don't realize that.
Yep. All right, so we're going to do a couple little prevalent slides, but get ready. There are some questions that have been coming through. The only thing I wanted to say, there's 2 slides about prevalent. We are a leader in the Magic Quadrant. Thank you for the strategic partnership from companies like Lowe's for putting us in this position. So we have strengths with the product and the service, the product strategy, as Jefferson had mentioned, and then also understanding verticals and industries and helping with strategy in that space as well. Our program and our platform has expanded exponentially. So as we work with companies like Lowe's and Jefferson and his team, we realize the things that are needed in order for third party to be successful and even nth party to be successful. So Jefferson may broach the topic during Q&A that he's expanding from IT into supply chain management at some point. And so those are the kinds of things that we like to integrate into the program for a holistic view. And he was very kind for Prevalent, since we have a threat monitoring program, which is VTM, but he does right now use BitSight for his threat intelligence, and we have integrated with them to identify the high-level scoring so that he can harmonize and normalize his risks and make risks come from one particular platform versus having the vendor go to both. So with that, Amanda, I'm going to shoot it back over to you for the polling question. And I have noticed a couple questions or a handful coming in, and giving more time to Jefferson for the next 12 or 13 minutes to answer those.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to put the poll question up right now. Are you looking to augment or establish a third-party risk management program in the next several months? I just launched it. I'd ask that you guys just answer honestly. We will reach out. I personally probably will reach out to you if I haven't already. I'll be honest. I noticed a couple of names I've seen before. So do that. Also check your spam if you're looking for a follow-up. Just wanted to say that as well. Sometimes we fall in there. But we do have plenty of questions for you guys. The first one is, could you share the details and link for the shared assessments framework? Was one. I don't know if it's possible for you guys to do that.
I'm on the steering committee of shared assessments, and if you go to sharedassessments.org, and you will find that they have a tools section in their website, and you can look for the vendor, the VROOM, and they also have the SIG, which is a standard, and they also have the SCA, which is their on-site visit testing protocol that we now do virtually. So sharedassessments.org is the best place to start. And then they've got a sales resource by the name of Vicki Dean. And if you need to get her email address, I'm sure it's either on the website or you can contact us and we can get that for you so that you can get information from her directly.
Perfect. Thanks, Brenda. Next question is, how does Lowe's deal with third parties versus suppliers delivering products to your stores, separate teams or joined at the hip, especially those suppliers who provide smart products?
Good question. And it's really a blend. And then I won't really get into specifics about who owns what, but we'll say that we're looking at everything. And it really goes back to talking about the CIA triad, which has nothing to do with the spy agency, but in information security for any asset. Imagine a triangle. You have the confidentiality on one side, the integrity, and the availability. And typically, information security risk is looking at confidentiality, but with supply chain, you're looking at the availability. And so that comes under our purview as well, because now we need to make sure that there's a business continuity plan in place, that every manufacturer we work with and every supplier can get products to us. And do they have the controls in place to actually survive a ransomware attack, or to be able to continue if something bad happens, or even if COVID hits? I did a tabletop exercise one time, business continuity planning, and we'd chosen pandemic as the episode for a scenario. And this is months before COVID ever hit. We had no idea it would actually happen, but that company's business impact analysis and their BCP, they thought a pandemic would be the biggest problem. And turns out they were right. A totally different company when I was a consultant, but they were right. So for supply chain, and if you want to reference, NIST recently came out with an enhanced cybersecurity framework called it's version 1.1, and they have a section for supply chain risk there under the identity category, or identify. And that's big because it actually helps us. We combine that with shared assessments to really determine what controls we need to look for supply chain. So we look at it all.
Perfect. Okay, next question is, how do you handle non-responsive vendors? Do you hold ISG responsible for the delays, etc.?
No. Well, first of all, we work the business unit. Again, going back to that 3 lines model where the business unit is the first line of defense, we will work with them, and we'll work with the vendor and send them reminders. And actually through Prevalent, the reminders are automatic, which is great, based on a certain time frame. We'll work with the business unit and say, hey, here's what we're encountering. You may want to reach out to your vendor and tell them we're not getting a response. At the end of the day, if they fail to respond to us and we've given them chances, they may wind up getting a do not recommend status.
It's so true. I mean,
those are red letters, so that's bad.
You know what I'm saying? Okay, let's continue. This is for you, Brenda. Does the platform have access to a repository of vendor data, or is that obtained via assessments?
So there's 2 different approaches. We have networks and we have exchanges. Some companies decide that they want to just ask for their proprietary questionnaires, or they'll use the Prevalent control framework questionnaire. And some companies will use if you're in a certain industry, we do have a legal network. And if you're in the healthcare industry, we have a healthcare network. We're more than willing to create a retail network, but we're waiting to get a couple more of those types of companies that want to use the same standards. So right now they're all kind of using their own standards, and we want to make sure that we get into a marketplace scenario for them. So assessments can come in and be completed. And if you are a company that wants to use one that's already readily available, we allow you to do that. And if you have your own questionnaire content that you need to absorb or collect, we also help you to do that as well.
Perfect. All right, this is back to Jefferson. How do you manage changes to business relationships? How do these loop back into the internal tiering?
That's a good question. And one way you can look at it is from the relationship level, which is actually the relationship with the business, and the engagement level. Theoretically, you want to assess everything on the engagement level, or at least we do. So one relationship could have multiple engagements with the company, totally different business functions, different data types, and so on, and have those engagements trickle up. Ideally, if you have a governance risk and compliance system, have those multiple engagement risks trickle up into an overall relationship risk.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And another one for you, Jefferson. What are the names and where are the peer groups that you referred to?
Well, the first one, I'll say, I'll throw Brenda under the bus for that one because she actually got us in touch with some other clients who had similar challenges, and we worked with them. RH-ISAC is a great one, at least for us, for the retail industry. There are different ISACs for information sharing groups, essentially, for different industries. And they're actually very informal, and you can actually reach out to other companies there as you develop relationships and share best practices without giving away anything proprietary. Then there are local conferences as well. ISACA conferences that we have here in town, other networking conferences, where you can actually, as you get to know peers in the industry, you can reach out and kind of bond with them. And at least in our area, it's a small circle for information security. So a lot of people know different people at different companies, and you kind of do it behind the scenes. But there's not really an official networking group yet, but hopefully we can get there.
So from a perspective of Prevalent, if you are already a customer of Prevalent, you can go ahead and contact info@prevalent.net to find out if you can become part of the strategy peer-to-peer team. We have approximately 5 different types of companies already in the group, and we're trying not to make it grow too large because we have a very systematic approach. They'll invite some of their leads to listen in, and only the directors or the people in charge of the programs are doing the discussion topics, and through Teams and chat, they'll get information. So Jefferson will bring 3 or 4 of his people, and they're in the background asking questions to Jefferson, and Jefferson will then bring them up if it's something that's pertinent to the topics. But otherwise, become part of Prevalent and then find out how you can be involved, and we'll figure out how to make it work.
That's right. I have a couple more questions here. I like this one. What is the area or one area or concern that might be on the horizon that has your attention for third parties for you?
When you look at the biggest threats to third parties right now, ransomware is an old term, but it's very prevalent. So making sure that companies are secure, patch management never goes away. It's still an issue with third parties. And as we depend more and more on operational technology versus information technology, there's not a good connection there. There's a huge risk between IT and OT, and a lot of companies don't have that figured out yet.
Yeah, and I think from your perspective, Jefferson, as well, is as you're looking at your supply chain management, the resiliency of being able to get content or products or services delivered to the customers is also just as heavy now, being that we're not only looking at ransomware and attacks from a threat from that perspective, but what does that threat then do from a supply for transportation or manufacturing as well?
How about this question? Oh, sorry, Jefferson, were you still going?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay. How about the 2020 SIG from shared assessments? Is there any big differences between 2018 and 2019?
I think that answer can come directly from shared assessments. They do a great job of sharing what are the differences that they've put in place. And again, sharedassessments.org can tell you what the 2019 to the 2020 is. I think that's the best place to go. I do believe that we are targeted to have the 2020 available in the very near future following the guidelines from shared assessment. So you'll be able to look at that yourself as well, and hopefully we'll be able to share what the Delta content is.
Mm-hmm. All right, a couple more if we can squeeze in. How do you create buy-in from the different business units in order to utilize a new platform, process, etc.?
You don't do it easily. There's a lot of security awareness that goes on behind the scenes. Actually, for us, this being October, this is Security Awareness Month, or Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So we're taking advantage of that, doing a lot of road shows, a lot of presentations within the team, and getting the word out and just educating people over time, asking for lunch and learn sessions and speaking with different teams. If you're in a hurry, it won't be done in a hurry, but over time, as people see that you actually are here to stay, you're not going away and you're relevant to them, they'll start coming to you.
Another empathetic thing that you've been doing is sometimes you'll outreach to people, like say, for example, a business unit has responsibility for over 20 vendors plus. I've noticed that you've also gone to them and said, hey, here we are, we're going to help you. And this is what we think you own. Is this correct? So you've been very empathetic. And I think that approach has done you good service.
That's a good point.
All right, one last question I think that we'll have time for is the 25-day SLA in relation to a determination or to get through the entire procurement process?
Good question. And no, that's for us to deliver our final report. That's our goal.
Yeah, so that's from collection to analyze to risk identify, verify, and validate in order to get a final representation report that says, here's the risks. You're either recommended with remediation or not recommended. So that's 25 days. And they've been doing pretty well with sticking with that turnaround time.
Love to see it. All right, there is one last question. You guys kind of answered it already, but I'll just reiterate it one more time. How do you handle the last minute assessments where a supplier can't or won't engage? You can't assess risks where there is no information. Question mark.
If there's no information, then we'll go with what we can. If we have that security ratings platform, like a BitSite rating, we'll use that. We'll use anything we can get a hold of, and we'll look at historically, have they had any security incidents? We'll give a recommendation, but we'll also say and underscore that with the knowledge that, hey, this based on what we know, here's the risk, but we don't know much. We need to know more, and let the business unit make that decision.
I believe you've been raising the risk a little bit, stating that they're a higher risk because you're using what's available versus what you're asking them to provide.
Right.
Well, that's it for now. It is at the top of the hour or bottom of the hour. How does that work? I don't know. It's 11 a.m. here in Arizona. All right, everybody. Hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Jefferson and Brenda. Pleasure to meet you, Jefferson. And we will see you next time.
Thank you, Amanda, and congratulations again, Jefferson. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Congrats, Jefferson. Bye.
Thanks.